afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Has everyone been enjoying the conference so far? Good? All right. How many people are headed home tonight?
Well, yes.
Okay, excellent. So you must be local.
A few miles away.
It's very convenient. Good, good. All right. So for the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to talk a little bit about IT security risk assessment. My name is Vienna Morrill, and I am a manager at Barry Dunn. I work in the consulting practice where I focus pretty much exclusively on higher education, doing projects such as these, as well as some IT strategic planning and system selection and other types of work. So, and actually we're located just up in Portland, Maine, so not too far from here, but we do have a national practice. So for our agenda today, we're going to start out just by talking a little bit about what is risk, what is the language of risk, and how can we apply that to IT security risk assessment. Next, we're going to talk about what's the big deal, why should you care, why is it important to do an IT security risk assessment. Then we're going to go through what the process of doing a risk assessment, and we'll use a case study from University of North Carolina in Charlotte. And I just want to quickly ask, is there anyone here from UNC Charlotte by any chance? No? Okay. So then we'll talk about some of the elements of the risk assessment process that you can bring back to your institutions, kind of what are the important key points and takeaways. Throughout the discussion, throughout the presentation, I would encourage people to ask questions. About halfway through, I'm going to ask all of you a question, so I'll be testing you to make sure you're still awake. All right. So we'll start off by talking about risk. What is risk? We deal with risks every day. An obvious example of this is driving. A specific risk we can identify with driving is driving in the winter and potentially sliding off the highway and getting into an accident. So how many people here are from New England? Yeah. Any Southerners in the audience? Okay. So I think as New Englanders, we have a higher risk tolerance for driving in a snowstorm than, say, somebody who grew up in the South. But there are still certain precautions that we take when we go drive in a snowstorm. There are things that we do to decrease the impact and the likelihood of getting into an accident. For example, we decrease the potential impact of an accident by buying a safer car, by buckling our seatbelts. We decrease the likelihood of getting into an accident by slowing down a little in inclement weather, by not following too closely, by using snow tires and having an all-wheel drive vehicle. Sometimes we might decide to take on a little extra risk and we decide to speed a little bit. But hopefully you're still constantly assessing the conditions. I see you guys chuckling over there. So somebody must be have a little bit of a record or a history. But still, hopefully we're assessing the conditions. You know, how heavy is the traffic? Can I afford to get a speeding ticket? All good things to consider. So the same principles apply when you think about doing an IT security risk assessment. We have certain business objectives we're trying to achieve, whether that be educating students, doing research, or just running the institution. We all recognize there are certain risks that we need to take on in order to achieve those objectives. But we do things to decrease the impact and likelihood of those risks occurring. I could stand up here today and tell you all that you could get rid of the majority of your IT security risk by just, disconnecting from the internet and going back to days of only desktop computing. But we all know that's not realistic. You need to take on certain risks to remain competitive in today's environment. So we've seen a growing interest in IT security risk assessment, and when you stack up the risks, it's easy to understand why. So I can safely say, pretty confidently, that nobody in here is going to win the Powerball Grand Prize. Sorry. We don't have the winner of the $20,000 in here, do we? Oh, okay. Those chances were a little better. Hopefully no one in here will ever be attacked and killed by a shark, although it seems like that statistic may need to be revisited after this summer. Has anyone in here ever had a hole-in-one golfing? I'll give it to you. Hopefully not getting struck. Yeah. So yeah, seriously. Hopefully no one gets struck by lightning. Audited by the IRS, your chances are starting to look a little more, well, less favorable. Having a security breach at your institution in the next 2 years, they say the chances are about 1 in 5. And this is from the Ponemon Institute, who they do an annual study on data breaches.
Point of clarification on that.
Sure.
Is that a failure of security or the release of information or whatever as a result of internal failures of process or literally?
I think it's all of the above. Yeah. So what is the cost of a data breach? Now, many of you are probably familiar with the Target data breach that happened last year. Analysts are now saying that cost Target about $252 million in direct expenses, and that's not including the loss in profits and revenue that they experienced. I think those are estimated at about a 40% drop. I don't know if anyone in here was at Dr. Jane LeClaire's presentation yesterday, but she highlighted some of the costs associated with a data breach as well. And I think she had one estimate that was about $12 million per organization. So the two costs that I put up on the screen, there's quite a range. You have the 58 cents per record that's projected by the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. You have the $201 per record that Ponemon Institute projects. And there's reasons for these differences. The Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report focuses on a lot of larger breaches, so there's certain economies of scale that start to play in. They also base their estimates on insurance claims, so it's much more focused on the direct costs. Whereas the Ponemon Institute report, they focus on breaches that are between, I think, 10,000 and 100,000 records, so the economies of scale don't play in it so much. And they also take into account the impact to things like goodwill. So what are some of the types of costs that go into responding to a data breach? You have your consumer protection mechanisms that you need to put into place. That's usually about $30 per individual. You have communication and notification costs. There's often fines associated with a data breach. You have legal fees. There's costs associated with doing forensics in result of a breach, as well as implementing stronger security controls as a result of the findings of those assessments. And then, of course, there's the reputational and goodwill impact. So the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report actually came up with what they call a better model, recognizing the variation between the Ponemon Institute and their estimates. The Ponemon Institute, as you can see, that's the green line. It only goes up to 100,000 records. They don't even recommend using it for anything above that. The red line's the Verizon 58 cents a record. But the blue line, they've come up with using like a log-log regression model, which quite honestly is beyond my math level, but essentially means it's a nonlinear relationship. There's a lot of different factors at play. So information like this is keeping a lot of people up at night. In the world of information security, it really can be information overload right now. It's enough to make a lot of people kind of throw up their hands and say, you know, I'm just going to hope and trust that my IT department knows what they're doing and they're keeping us all nice and safe. There's also a lot of challenges around prioritization. Maybe you know that you have a lot of risk areas, but you don't really know where to begin. There's limited resources at play, and then there's also oftentimes cultural barriers you have to deal with, which I think is particularly pertinent when you're in a higher education culture. So, So UNC Charlotte, I think it's fair to say that there were some people that were losing some sleep at night. A little background on UNC Charlotte. They're an institution of about 22,000 students with a growing research presence. And they also have a highly distributed IT environment. At the time that we did this risk assessment, they had about 50% of their IT staff reporting outside of the central IT organization. This makes it particularly challenging to get a handle on where all your risks and vulnerabilities exist. For instance, you have the central IT department, which may have this fabulous data center, with all enterprise class controls, video surveillance, card access, redundant cooling, dedicated generator, and then you may have some colleges and departments that have a server in a closet or a professor with a server under his desk. Challenges like that. So UNC Charlotte hired us to come on board and help them conduct this IT security risk assessment with an objective of setting a baseline for future audit and operational planning, as well as to just increase general awareness for IT security risk. We had two specific objectives as part of this. We were looking primarily to understand where are the university level risks, so the things that really impact everyone. But then we were also looking to identify some of those more specific and discrete risk areas. For instance, that professor with the server under his desk. UNC Charlotte wanted to involve 25 colleges and departments in this process, and they wanted to do it in a 3-month time frame, which was quite aggressive. So that really helped shape our process. So over the next set of slides, I'm going to take you through our IT security risk assessment process and some of the key elements of each of these 4 components. So any questions at this point?
Who engaged the risk assessment? Was it at the request of the CIO or a risk management leadership position at UNC other than that?
So actually, I would say that this was quite the ideal scenario because the IT security risk assessment was an outcome in part of their IT strategic plan. And the IT strategic plan had been developed collaboratively with a lot of different stakeholders and had executive level support. So because of that, the drivers were very clear, and we had that, again, executive level support behind the risk assessment. Any other questions? Okay, I'll keep moving. Let's see. All right, so planning. Planning was really important. Again, we had that 3-month time frame. We were trying to engage a lot of people, and we wanted to use a really highly collaborative approach. It's important to understand, UNC Charlotte wasn't looking to just outsource their IT security risk assessment process. They really wanted somebody who would come in and help guide them through it the first time around so they could maintain the process going forward. So because of that, we needed to really make sure that we worked with them hand in hand, made sure that there was buy-in into the process, and that we were all on the same page. So throughout the process, we worked with really 2 kind of key groups. We had a project team, which involved IT security, 2 individuals from their IT security department. And then we also had the Information Assurance Committee, which was a subcommittee of their IT governance structure. And that committee involved a cross-representative group of stakeholders, including some people who were very technical, as well as some people who were more functional. But it was great because it got a lot of different perspectives and people getting skin in the game. So one of the first things we did in working with the IT project team and the Information Assurance Committee is we put together a questionnaire. We realized there's no way that we're going to be able to sit down with 25 colleges and departments and hold their hand and walk them through this IT security risk assessment within this 3-month time frame. So we decided to develop a questionnaire to help facilitate the information gathering portion of the assessment process. And the Information Assurance Committee and our project team were really critical in making sure that the questionnaire was right-sized and had the right language that people could really understand and respond to. So this is just a little snapshot of the questionnaire. Now, it's interesting, we started the risk assessment. UNC Charlotte really wanted to use the ISO 27000 standards for information security. And we put together a questionnaire. It had about 120 questions representing all their different domains and control areas. Quickly realized that was way too much. We didn't want to overwhelm people. So we decided to boil it down to some areas that really reflected some of the most prevalent trends and risk areas that we saw in higher education, which really reflect what you see across many industries today. So as you can see, the 21 risk areas listed along the right-hand side. And I guess at this point, I'd like to ask you all what some of the risk areas that you're finding to be of most concern at your institution. Absolutely. I mean, we had a question around information security training and awareness, which is a big component of trying to mitigate some of that. And it's interesting you mentioned phishing. The Verizon Data Breach Investigations report talks about phishing and how susceptible people still are to phishing. It's amazing. They say like 23% of people will still open phishing emails and 11% will actually click on links in the phishing emails. So that's definitely a good example. Anything else? Yeah, that's a great example. I mean, change management's important there too. And then also the logging and monitoring was an area that we actually found, yeah, exactly what you said. A lot of people, even if they are logging, they're not actually actively monitoring or reviewing those logs. Exactly.
So I assume...
yeah. I mean, there's...
The security was practically not consistent.
Yeah. I mean, there's simple things like that that you can do, you know. Just, exactly.
You know, drop the lights, lock the doors, make sure everything is secure. We have profs who didn't do that, and their classrooms, their labs were vandalized, and they were blocked.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it was like putting out an open invitation, come help yourself.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report also talks about physical or theft of devices. And well, my mind always goes immediately to theft from a vehicle. I guess that accounts for about 22% of the thefts, and while thefts from a workspace are 55%, which that statistic really surprised me.
What about number 2 and number 20? So when I think of data storage, I think of students and faculty who will save the hard drive, and then those are risks as well when they go for a walk. That's on the key information. So there's that awareness and education can always go to the network.
Mm-hmm.
And then data protection, I guess, you mean like passwords or actual reporting or?
Yeah, it's kind of the way that title doesn't really tell you a whole lot. I think with that one we were actually looking at, I think we were looking at data classification more specifically, and do they actually have a good inventory of where their data is and how it's classified and standards for how you treat different classes of data.
So a lot of the times when we're talking about data within the context of security or risk assessments, we focus a lot on compromised data, you know, so breaches and disclosures. It's the integrity of the data because that's just essential to the operation. And I think that's where sometimes where it's separated and it's looking at the availability or integrity of that data. Because we're all in higher ed and we all fundamentally, I think, have a data problem in different respects. It could be whether or not it's clean or good data, and every time that your presentation about a project, it kind of comes to light. So I think that's that other aspect rather than just a compromise on
Yeah, absolutely.
disclosure.
Yep, for sure. And that's, I mean, that's all part of the risk assessment as well. So I actually found this next little graphic just yesterday. I added it in. I thought it was really interesting to see what all the different sources of data breaches have been in higher education. This is from an ECAR report that EDUCAUSE put out in 2014. But as you can see, hacking or malware, unintended disclosure, so you maybe have a server that's not appropriately secured and you think it's appropriately secured. Portable devices, so that's the, you know, the laptops that go missing. Interestingly, payment card fraud does not even show up on the pie, and I think that that's actually an area where higher ed has actually been doing quite well, just because of PCI data security standards. I mean, you really don't have much of a choice about needing to deal with that, so it's low down on the list, thankfully. All right, so the next step in our process, and I guess I need to keep an eye on the time here. So even though we decided to use this questionnaire, we realized that it was still really important that we had some face time with each of the colleges and the departments that we were doing the risk assessment with. So we set up a series of 5 work sessions. In each work session, we invited 5 of the different colleges and departments. We tried to mix things up a little bit, so not all colleges in one session and then academic folks in another, or administrative. We really tried to intermingle people. And during these work sessions, what we did is we went through and explained what are our objectives of doing this IT security risk assessment, what questions do you have, and then also to take them through the questionnaire, question by question. And we actually had hard copies available and electronic copies because we really wanted to encourage people to start thinking about how you're going to answer this question now. Is there somebody else that you're going to need to pull in order to get the answer? We really wanted to ensure that people were going to complete it on time. We gave them about a 3-week window. And again, we had this very tight time frame, so it was important to make sure that we stayed within that. And it actually ended up being very successful. We received all of the questionnaires back on time, which was amazing, I thought. And then another one of our objectives is really to make sure that people understood that the difference between an IT security risk assessment and an audit. In order to get full cooperation and transparency, we needed to make sure people understood this is not about findings. You're not going to get dinged, for the areas you have gaps. This is really to help you identify and understand where the areas that you need to improve your security, and where are the areas where the university as a whole can come together and start making some improvements as well. The added benefit of this approach and that intermingling of different people in different areas is there was a lot of information sharing. So as people talked about risks that they could all identify with, there was a lot of discussion about, hey, I use this tool or I use this technique. So that was a kind of an added takeaway. So as I said, we got all the questionnaires back on time. And the next piece was the ball was really in our court, and we needed to analyze the responses. We did have to do some follow-up just to clarify certain areas. But what we did is we identified the gaps, and we were really focused on finding, those common information security gaps that were shared across the colleges and departments, and then also those discrete gaps. And we developed 2 types of reports. So we had one overall information security risk assessment report, which I'm going to show you a little bit more of momentarily. And then we also had the college and department specific reports. And those were really almost like memos, I would call them. They were usually 3 or 4 pages long. They gave a quick overview of what we found at a university-wide level. And then we gave anywhere from 1 to 5 kind of recommendations or areas that each college and department should be thinking about and addressing on their own. So the IT security risk assessment matrix was really the kind of the meat of our report. It basically aligned with the questionnaire. So we had those 21 different risk areas in the questionnaire, and for each risk area we have a row in this matrix. So you can see on the left-hand side we give a description of the vulnerability associated with each risk area. We give a risk summary, and then we do a likelihood and impact rating and an overall risk rating. And the way we did this was a little bit unique. What we did is we said, what's the inherent risk level associated with this? So not taking into account what controls UNC Charlotte has in place yet, but just thinking about untreated, what's the risk level? We then documented our analysis results, and based on those analysis results, we said, what's the residual risk? How well is UNC Charlotte dealing with this risk area? So here we had a residual risk level of low, explained why. For the recommendation, we had found that there were some colleges and departments who had specific systems and applications where they could be doing better with access controls. So those appeared in the individual college and department reports. Our intent wasn't to, publicly shame all of the colleges and departments for the areas where they had gaps. So those really only went to the receiving unit. And then the relevancy column, it would either say common, meaning it's a university-wide risk area, or college and department specific. Any questions on the?
So who established what the qualitative values?
For like impact and likelihood and, yeah, well, we worked with the project team primarily to establish those levels, and they were based on a number of criteria. It's really hard to have like specific hard figures associated with those.
So they defined it, so it's in the sense of the project team, or were the folks being asked the questions like that committee?
It was more us and the project team.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming the questionnaire had a rating system attached to each of the questions, and so you would have a total of points and things for each section, perhaps, that would result in the scoring of high, medium, low?
No, the questionnaire was really just qualitative. It wasn't, no, it was really just up to us to look at the result and interpret. I mean, we based on criteria like frequency of transaction. Like if it's something that happens a lot.
Rank that as compared to other criteria. Kind of following on what you're saying, if you were ranking certain criteria higher than others.
How would we do that? Or?
Well, no, I'm assuming you do.
Oh, yes, exactly. Yeah. As part of our report, we also had these heat maps, and the heat map on the left is that inherent risk level. So what we did, I've left, you can barely see it, but I left the access controls example in so you can follow it from the matrix slide. But you can see where each of the 21 risk areas fall in terms of their inherent risk. And then on the right, we reshaded them all to represent what the kind of residual risk level was at UNC Charlotte. So this enables you to see where are the areas where they're doing pretty good in addressing risk, and where are the areas where, for instance, that little red bubble in the upper right-hand corner was something they really needed to prioritize. So bird's eye view of the report, essentially. So I'm going to go quickly through this because I want to reserve a little time at the end, but really important part was reporting back, again, because we wanted them to own the process. We wanted everyone to have buy-in and to understand. So it was important to kind of close the loop. We had an opportunity for everyone to review the reports, and if there were any factual errors, we could address those. But then we also came on campus and we did a series of presentations. We met with the CIO. At the time, the CIO was acting as the CISO. They were, I think, actually actively looking for CISO at the time. But then we also had a meeting with the Information Assurance Committee to walk through the whole report, answer questions. The project team was there to talk about next steps and how these risks were actually going to be addressed. And then we also had another meeting which we opened up to anyone who had participated in the process. And we did the same thing. We walked through the report, answered questions. The project team was there a lot of people had questions about, is Central IT going to be available to help me address the discrete risks that you identified for my department or college, in which case the answer was usually yes. So I think that was a really important step to have, that kind of face time and giving people the time to ask questions. So what were the outcomes for UNC Charlotte? Again, collaborative approach really helped to facilitate buy-in and also knowledge transfer so they could maintain the process going forward. I think we kept the process simple enough that it was sustainable for them. They've actually since gone through their second IT security risk assessment on their own. Increased awareness for IT security risk. Of course, there's huge value in just getting people in a room and thinking through all these risk areas and thinking about, where the gaps might be in their own units. And then also establishing priorities for addressing gaps. So I think it was really helpful for the units to see, here are some areas that I know are risks. I've known for a while they're risks, but now there's some visibility around this risk, and the university is looking to address it in a more coordinated manner. So the onus isn't all on me to take care of all of this. So I think it's fair to say that UNC Charlotte is probably sleeping better at night, maybe not quite like a baby, but better. The thing with an IT security risk assessment is it's not a one and done. It's not something that you can finish, brush off your hands, and say, okay, I'm good. It's definitely a process, and that's why it's so important to have ownership for the process and to make sure it's sustainable and have a good, process behind it. So, takeaways. I think from the first part of the presentation, it's clear, it's a risky world out there. Between sharks and security breaches and lightning. But security breaches are expensive, and it's something that I know we'd all like to avoid. Engagement of stakeholders and executive level support are critical. To your question earlier about how the plan was initiated, I think it's really important that you do have the executive level buy-in for the process, as well as stakeholder buy-in. Making sure that the communication is there to ensure they understand that we're not here to audit you, we're here to help you. An IT security risk assessment is not an audit to that point. Although a lot of times the areas that you decide to address as a result of an IT security risk assessment end up informing audit planning. So you may implement a new control as a result, and then the audit team is going to maybe in turn include that in their future audit work. So there is a link, but they're not the same. And then conducting an information security risk assessment doesn't have to be complicated. There are many ways to right-size a risk assessment to your organization, whether it be significantly smaller or significantly larger than UNC Charlotte. But a lot of the principles that we've talked about today are applicable universally. I think some of the tools, such as a questionnaire, the matrix, the heat maps, and just the communication element of it are all applicable. And also, doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, look at UNC Charlotte. They wanted to do the ISO 27000 standards right off the bat, realized that's not going to work the first time around. It's progress over perfection. So if you start today and you sustain it, I bet in 5 years you're going to be in a much better place. Maybe not in 1 year, you're not going to get everything done, but 5 years from now, you'll be maybe sleeping like a baby at night. So, with that, I'd like to answer any questions you all might have. I guess we only have like 3 minutes, but do what I can.
What were the areas that were represented in that project group that was analyzing the results back from the questionnaires? Was it all IT folks, or was it folks, what other departments?
So for the analysis, it was actually our Barry Dunn team that was doing pretty much all of it. We did have those 2 individuals from the IT security department available to us, which was really helpful because they have certain institutional knowledge and everything where we could bounce questions off of them. But really, the analysis was our deal. Yeah.
And now that they're doing it on their own, who's doing that now?
I believe that it's the IT security risk team, but there may also be the Information Assurance Committee may have some sort of a role in that, although I'm sure they're not going through every, but.
You had said that you didn't want to publicly shame some departments, assuming that the reports did go to the central IT.
Yes, they were not to the entire central IT, but they did go to the Information Security Office.
The reason I'm asking is because very few people willingly decide, I'm going to make my data risky.
Oh, yeah.
So that the challenge I'm thinking about is that if you don't share what's wrong, sometimes the university can't make the right choice on resource allocation. And so, yes, you're talking about you don't want to shame somebody, but that's somehow implying that the reason why
Oh, yeah. I think some of it is cultural, too. I think in a larger organization like UNC Charlotte, there's a certain amount of pride associated with each of these individual IT departments out in the colleges, and they don't want to look like, you know, they have like more gaps than another college or department. I think there's some of it. I don't think it was a huge factor, but I do think I think people appreciated the fact that it didn't need to be elevated to a publicly visible level for this.
As I say, it's a resource scarcity, you know, that makes it hard for the institution to actually say, especially if that red bubble's in the upper right, you know, it's kind of like, basically, we're not going to, what we're going to do is anything that hits a certain threshold, it becomes almost an institutional priority.
Right, which it did. All of those bubbles, everyone had access to. It was the things that were very unique and specific to one area. It's like, you need to do something about this, that weren't universally shared, at least this passed through. Any other questions? All right. I think 5 o'clock, right on time. So thank you all.